Good evening, everybody. Tonight I decided to read from More Than Mindfulness, which is a book of compiled talks from modern Western Kruba Ajahns, compiled by Beth Steff, who most, if not everybody here, probably knows. And I wanted to read from Ajahn Jayasaro's book, Ajahn Jayasaro's talk, The Paramis as Practices of Liberation. It's too long for the hour, but so I'm going to jump a few paragraphs in. The first Parami is a very familiar one, that of dana. Meditators can sometimes be a bit sniffy about dana. We're not so much into this merit-making stuff. We're into meditation. We're here for the essence of the Dhamma, not the basics. But the development of generosity and giving is, if it is carried out correctly, a practice of liberation. Through it, we seek to be liberated from stinginess and meanness, an attachment to our possessions and our wealth. When we give without expectation of any reward, the mind experiences an initial form of freedom, letting go of the burden of attachment to external material things. Through giving, we experience a great joy, and there are, too, many lessons that may be learned from observing the mind in the process of giving. The Buddha says successful giving is achieved when we take care of our minds before giving the gift, at the time of giving, and after giving. This is often overlooked. Let's say someone is taking food to the temple, and they get up a bit later than they meant to, and then everything is a rush. They're hurrying around, glancing at the clock, worrying it's not going to be ready in time. They can get upset and scrambled. In this way, they are failing in the practice of merit-making and offering of dana in the pre-giving phase. At the time of offering food in Thailand, donors will often keep a beady eye on the abbot to see whether or not he takes any of their food. If he doesn't, or he takes little, their mind can be clouded with disappointment or displeasure. The joy of giving is undermined and its liberating value lost. Sometimes, when people go to take back their dish, they're feeling resentful. I have been up since 4 o'clock this morning to make that, and they've hardly taken any of it. They're not taking care of their mind after giving. Giving dana is not always such an easy practice. It's an exercise of mindfulness in and of itself, to care for your mind before giving, at the moment of giving, and after giving. If you feel regret after giving something away, then you have also reduced the purification of mind that takes place through giving. The word merit, or punya, means the purification of mind. This isn't a theory or a Buddhist concept. Merit is something which can be directly experienced very easily if you compare how your mind feels when you give something with expectation of something in return, and how it feels when you give something without expectation of return. I think there is a significant difference. The cleansing, brightening effect of giving without expectation is not experienced to the same degree at all when there is a desire for some return. I would like to share with you an example of the beauty of dana that I experienced a few years ago in India. I was walking around Maharashtra in western India in a kind of a loop from the city of Aurangabad through Ajanta and Ellora. I would spend the nights amongst the hills which bordered the road. There were few mosquitoes and the weather was mild. I didn't need my umbrella or a mosquito net. I would just put down a ground sheet, cover myself with my robe and sleep just as monks did in the Buddha's time. At dusk one evening, as I climbed up a hill looking for a suitable place to spend the night, I realized that I was being watched by a goat herder from a nearby village. I was concerned that out of curiosity, he would follow me and try to engage me in conversation. But as night fell, all was quiet, and I sat on a large flat rock meditating. It was perhaps around 9:00 p.m. that I heard something scrambling up the hillside. I was a little wary and shined my torch to see what it could be. Eventually, a man appeared over the ridge. I saw that it was the goat herder. He had climbed up the hill in the dark without a light, carrying a big bunch of bananas. He was afraid I was hungry. He probably worked a 10 or 12-hour day, and after dark, he'd walked from his village for a couple of kilometers and then climbed up the hill in the dark. The hill was covered in boulders, quite difficult to climb. He did all this to give me a bunch of bananas. I didn't speak the Marathi language, and it was quite difficult to explain to him that I don't eat in the evening, and that, grateful for his kindness as I was, I couldn't accept his gift. He was understandably disappointed. I felt bad for him, and he left. Then about an hour or two later, quite late at night, I heard more scrambling, somebody climbing up this hill again. Who could it be so late at night? It was the same man, this time proudly carrying a blanket. I accepted the offering and made it clear that in the morning I would leave it for him to retrieve at the bottom of the hill. It was the kind of giving that you experience and know that you'll never forget. That man and his act of kindness will always stay with me. We have all acted kindly in the past, and if we bring the memory of a pure act of generosity to mind even 5, 10, or 20 years afterwards, notice how bright and joyful it makes us feel. The Buddha referred to Ariyadana, noble treasures of the heart. Acts of generosity become noble treasures of the heart in that they never lose their value. They never become tarnished. Whenever you recall the memory of an act of generosity, your mind becomes bright and clear and happy. This uplift of the mind is what we call merit. Dana, the act of giving, is the fundamental means of making merit, but it is also an act of liberation. It is our first lesson in letting go. Learning how to let go of our attachments to possessions, to wealth, to money, creates a habit of letting go. It creates a habit of abandoning attachment which we can build upon and develop internally. It comes to our aid when we come to deal with our relationship with the negative emotions which we have held on to for a very long time. The second parami is sila. How is sila a practice of liberation? If we voluntarily undertake to observe certain boundaries for our actions and speech, and we are able to consistently govern our conduct within those boundaries, even on occasions and situations when we are very tempted to transgress them, then we become liberated from the bad karma which we might otherwise create. Also, very importantly, we free ourselves from the guilt and anguish and self-loathing that accompanies unskillful actions. These first two paramis might be considered the Buddhist answer to the question, how do you create self-esteem? You do it by governing your conduct and speech within boundaries that you have voluntarily adopted. The voluntary part is crucial. If you are maintaining a moral standard out of fear or desire for some reward, the psychological benefit is lost. And you do it by giving. Because when you give, you are providing to yourself, because when you give, you are proving to yourself that you can make a positive impact on your family, on your surroundings, on your community, on the society in which you live. You are proving that you can bring happiness to others. And by constantly giving, you are strengthening this perception of yourself as someone who can make a difference in the world. It may not be a spectacular difference, but small reductions of suffering and small increases in happiness and welfare are meaningful and bring joy with them. Giving, together with the restraint of sila, creates the sense of self-respect, self-esteem, which is necessary for the more profound levels of Dhamma practice. The third of these paramis is nekkhamma. Nekkhamma is renunciation. It is the renunciation of all that is negative, useless, and harmful in our lives. That's the first level. The more refined level is the renunciation of all that is trivial and pointless. Nekkhamma means transcending the world of sensuality, or at least withdrawing from it. In its advanced form, nekkhamma may mean abandoning one's old way of life and becoming a monk or a nun. But for most people, in everyday terms, it means gaining a perspective on sensual desires and not being manipulated by them. The 5 precepts provide a framework of restraint by which lay Buddhists can ensure that their natural desires for sensory pleasure will not lead to harm for themselves or others. The attitude to sensuality here is not some kind of Puritan rejection of physical instincts, saying, I enjoy it, therefore it's bad, or I am bad because I enjoy it. It's a recognition of a simple psychological truth that if your only access to feelings of well-being is through the sensual world, you're putting all your eggs in one very fragile basket. You are condemning yourself to a very unstable experience of happiness and well-being, because the forms, sounds, odors, and all they are based upon lie outside of our control. The body itself and its capacity to enjoy those sensory pleasures are also unstable and unreliable. Psychologically, the point is that if you are too caught up in the sensual realm, then your mind does not incline towards, it doesn't delight in, the non-sensual realm. A very simple analogy. If you're in a tall building and you're on the ground floor, you can't, at the same time, be on a higher floor. It's not that there's anything wrong with the ground floor, but if you'd like to see what the view is like from a higher floor, then you have to be able to leave the ground floor, at least on certain occasions. In the life of lay Buddhists, it's generally recommended that one takes the 8 precepts on the Uposatha day, and if possible, also on the Wanpra day. That is the 8th day of the waxing and waning moon. That makes 4 days a month. The 5 precepts are a sufficient and effective standard for body and speech on a daily basis. But by undertaking 8 precepts, you take on additional precepts, such as abstaining from entertainments that are not directly concerned with the avoidance of unwholesome actions per se. They are precepts of renunciation. They provide a taste, an experience of renouncing the non-essential. It is a regular training in how to develop a perspective on our relationship with the sensual realm. On a daily basis, one of the ways that we can develop nekkhamma most effectively is the practice of meditation. In focusing on the breath, for instance, we put our attention on an object that is not immediately attractive or stimulating. And that is precisely the point. The mind, which is addicted to thought, to memory, and to imagination, feels threatened by meditation. It struggles. It feels very uncomfortable if it has to devote itself to the bare experience of an in-breath and out-breath. This reaction is something to be accepted and recognized as being as natural as the struggle of a wild animal to resist any attempt to tame it. But if we are willing to be patient, if we see the value of practicing in that way, then we can eventually transcend the addiction. In the initial stages of meditation practice, the mind will gallop off elsewhere. It will seek refuge in the enjoyment of memories and imagination. Training the mind to let go of that habit is developing the perfection of renunciation. The sensuality that we are renouncing in meditation is not restricted to the coarser forms of delight, sexual fantasies, and so on. We renounce whatever it is that we enjoy thinking about and dwelling upon. Memories and perceptions of what we like pull us away from the meditation object. Being mindful of the breath means not forgetting it, bearing it in mind. But if it does wander, recognizing that it has done so means the mind is back on track. It is a moment of clear awareness, of sampajanya, comprehension that what you're doing now is not what you set out to do. In effect, you wake up to what's going on. Following that moment of wakefulness, the return to the meditation object is the actual practice of nekama barami. It means you make the decision to reject the sensual world of indulgence and trivial enjoyments and return to the task in hand. You are voluntarily returning to the simple, non-exciting reality in the present moment. Many people who start to meditate are discouraged when they find that their meditation practice consists primarily of bringing the mind back to the breath. It goes off and you bring it back, and then it goes again and you bring it back again, and so on. You may think, I'm not doing this right, or I can't do this properly. But wandering and returning is the point. You're developing an ability to recognize that the mind has strayed. You're developing the strength of mind and the renunciation to say, yes, even though I find this quite an enjoyable mental state, quite an enjoyable thought and memory, I'm going to put it down because I aspire to something higher and more meaningful. Often, the reason why thoughts, the same thoughts, return again and again is because there's still a delight in them. There's an abiding interest in the thought and the mental state. So, you bring the mind back. But if it's not done wholeheartedly, there's no real renunciation involved. There's still a lingering interest and a desire to carry on that thought to its conclusion. After the mind is back with the breath for a short time, it strays back to where it was just now, and you become even more frustrated. The spirit of renunciation is key. A couple of suggestions here on dealing with distracting thoughts in meditation. If the distraction is predominantly one of words rather than images, when you catch yourself thinking a particular phrase, then rather than returning to the meditation object straight away, deliberately repeat the phrase in your mind a few times. After a few repetitions, a feeling of boredom will arise, and at that point, return to the breath. Now there is a wholehearted renunciation of the thought. You don't want to think that thought anymore. A variation on this is to carry on the train of thought in a very slow and deliberate way. Very soon you lose interest in it and can return to the breath voluntarily. So, if your mindfulness is strong and your commitment is strong, then merely being aware that the mind has strayed, that awareness, that awakening of the mind, is sufficient for the thought to fall away, to cease by itself. But in the case that the thought is more tenacious and there is more investment in it, these two techniques, counterintuitive as they may seem, can be very helpful. Renunciation is simplification. Simplification allows us to see the way things are much more clearly and effectively. We feel lighter. We feel brighter. We feel the confidence to recognize that without attachment to enjoyment of memory, imagination, and so on, we feel better. We make a profit. We don't lose out in any way. The next parami is wisdom, panya. Wisdom is considered to be the heart of the Buddhist path. There are different levels of wisdom. As a parami, the kind of wisdom emphasized is wise reflection, yoniso manasikara, which may be divided into two kinds. First is the reflection, the thinking which seeks to replace a negative mental state, an afflictive emotion, with a wholesome mental state. The second is on the reflection on the way things are, specifically the three characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. This twofold division parallels the two approaches to meditation called samatha and vipassana. Samatha deals with craving and other unwholesome mental states. Vipassana with our ignorance of the way things are. An example of the first kind of wise reflection is one with which you may be familiar. Reflecting in ways that encourage loving kindness and forgiveness to replace persistent negativity. Similarly, when sensual thoughts, memories, and perception completely obsess the mind, then we develop wise reflection on the unattractive nature of the human body. There is nobody, no matter how attractive, how beautiful, how handsome, whose body lacks non-beautiful or non-handsome features. Instead of allowing the mind to dwell unrestrainedly on the beautiful, handsome, attractive features, we simply shift the focus and dwell upon one of the unattractive features. Reducing the power that attraction and aversion exert upon our mind is an important life skill. Another key reflection is on death. Reflecting on the inevitability of death, the uncertainty as to when it will occur, and how counters heedlessness, laziness, and complacency. The second kind of wise reflection is based upon observing the way things are, in particular looking again and again at the impermanent, uncertain nature of experience as it manifests in the five khandhas of body, perceptions, feelings, mental formations, and consciousness. We make conscious the impermanence of every aspect of life, inner and outer. In daily life, we can use Ajahn Chah's teaching on Meine, continually bringing the mind back to the uncertainty and unreliability of all that occurs. The unsatisfactoriness of unenlightened existence might seem a rather grand philosophical position to take, but in daily life we can investigate it in the simplest of ways. On public transport, for example, we may give ourselves the task of noticing the changes in posture of everybody around us. Nobody is still for more than a few seconds, and it's clear that almost every single movement that is made is an attempt to escape from discomfort. Reflecting on anatta means looking into causality. When we look closely, we see no owner of experience, no permanent independent entity controlling the show. What we see is this complex flow of causes and conditions. Being able to see things in terms of causes and conditions allows us to make wise choices. We can start to discriminate between those causes and conditions which are amenable to correction or to encouragement, and those causes and conditions which are outside of our control and which we need simply to accept. Lacking that wisdom, we may find ourselves accepting things which should be amended and trying to abandon things which should be accepted. It's through clear penetration and reflection on the causal nature of phenomena that we can respond appropriately and wisely to different situations. This is wisdom on that level of developing anicca sanya, the perception of impermanence; dukkha sanya, the perception of unsatisfactoriness; anatta sanya, the perception of non-self. These are creating habits and creating an affinity with, a familiarity with, the three characteristics. It will stand one in very good stead as the mind becomes more peaceful through meditation and can be turned to investigating the three characteristics on a non-verbal level. This is not vipassana in itself, but creates a pathway for it. It's creating a way into the non-verbal recognition, cognition of the three characteristics. Wisdom is often divided into three categories: the wisdom that comes with listening and studying, the wisdom that comes from thinking about things we've heard and studied, and the wisdom that comes from meditation. The more we look at our minds and the more we understand ourselves, the more we understand the human condition. In meditation, we are the guinea pigs, the representatives of the human race with whom we have the most immediate access. If you can develop insight into the way that greed, jealousy, hatred, and so forth appears in your mind, then you know how they appear in the human mind generally, because they are universal characteristics. Similarly, the more you understand how the positive qualities arise in your own mind, then the more you understand and appreciate the goodness in other people. Empathy arises through this kind of insight. Through meditating, you gain some very interesting information about the way that defilements work. There is a common idea that goodness makes you a bit gullible and liable to be outsmarted by the unscrupulous and evil. In fact, the more you look at your mind, the more you understand defilement. And the more you understand defilement, the easier it is to recognize it and guard against it. There are many old wisdom tales. One deals with a theft of jewels from the Emperor of China. The investigations fail to reveal the thief, but it is clear that it must be someone within the palace. The wise emperor orders a magic bell to be suspended behind a curtain in the main assembly hall. He tells all the suspects that the magic bell is sensitive to immorality, and the moment the thief touches it, the bell will ring. Then everyone is commanded to form into a single file and walk behind the curtain, one by one, and touch the magic bell. They do so, but no sound is heard. Everyone assumes that the plan didn't work. But then the emperor demands to see everyone's hands. The bell has been coated with grease, and all but one person, the thief, has traces of grease on his hand. He was the only one who did not dare touch the bell. The wise emperor did not need magic to catch the thief. He relied on his understanding of human nature. I'm going to now go towards the end of the chapter. I'm going to stop at that Parami, but then at the end of his talk, he briefly summarizes all of the Parami. In the practice of creating the foundation for and supporting conditions for meditation, we cultivate these kinds of liberation. Liberation from stinginess and selfishness, from attachment to material things through dana, attachment from the unskillful actions and speech which create bad karma, and from remorse and lack of self-respect through sila, liberation from entrapment in the sensual world through nekama, liberation from prejudice and irrationality from superficial and deluded attitudes, thoughts, and perceptions through panya. Liberation from fear of pain and difficulty through khanti. Liberation from complacency, stagnation, and laziness through virya. Liberation from doubt and irresolution through adhitthana. Liberation from insecurity and hypocrisy through satya. Liberation from anger, aversion, and resentment through metta. Liberation from addiction to feelings of liking and disliking through upekkha. By cultivating these 10 paramis, we nurture the causes and conditions for the ultimate liberation. May these 10 paramis flourish within you all. Anybody has questions for the Ajahns?
Thank you, Jack, for the reading. That was a really beautiful reading. Ajahn, I just had a question regarding the generosity aspect. Is it more important to look at the quality of your heart before, during, and after versus the outcome of the recipient of that gift? There's like the more subtle ways of looking at it. Like I think the example that Ajahn Jayasaro used was of food and wanting it to be eaten by the abbot or so. But then there's also the other aspect of when giving, say, to a homeless person and wanting them to use it in a way that's beneficial for them. My question is just around like how do you approach, say, your expectations around wanting them to use it for something wholesome versus unwholesome?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do both. It's hard not to say in that particular example, look and see what the reaction is of the recipient. But it is more important, that just as he was saying, I think, I agree that, Ajahn Jayasaro, as he was saying, it's more important to give without expectation, so that you know that your intention is to offer something that is hopefully going to be a benefit to the person you're giving it to. But if they pick it up and just kind of store it by the side of them and wait for something else to come along, and then they walk away, and you suspect they're going just to sell it to get some money to go and do something else, you have to let go of that. Otherwise you're sullying your whole intention of just freely offering. But it doesn't mean that in other circumstances you can't enjoy, if there is a reaction that shows that their gratitude or their appreciation or whatever, there's no reason why you can't register that, know that, and enjoy that and take delight in that. But if that is the expectation, you'll be disappointed, and then that kind of sullies the whole aspect of generosity being giving. The highest form of giving is because, or the highest motivation for giving, I think, in one of the sutras is because it provides an ornament for the mind. The effect that it has just innately is one that brings a sense of a noble quality to the heart. So that's the most important thing.
And so he, I just spontaneously was like, "Oh, Mom, can I give this to this homeless fellow?" And he was just sitting outside the restaurant, looking very poor and not so well. And she said, "Oh yeah," and I think she was very proud that I wanted to do that. So I went up to him and I said, "Oh, can I offer you some food that we didn't eat from the restaurant?" And he looks at me and he goes, "What is it?" And I was a bit shocked. I was like, "Oh, it was, I don't remember what it was at the time, but I described it." And I'm not sure if he might have actually said no thanks, because he wanted what he wanted to have. And my mom always reminded me of that. And it's funny because it's like, it's easy to focus on the outcome. that, I tried to do something nice, and it was this kind of very strange response. But it's sad because that's what like comes up. It's like the interaction rather than the upwelling of desire to help another person, which is like really all we want to focus on. When it happens to work out, and the person, I'm so grateful, I'm so happy, we then can have mudita for that person. And like, they're grateful, they're happy, and also maybe they do feel cared for and they are eating some food and getting some sustenance. But that's just like an add-on, that mudita, that feeling of joy is an add-on, and it doesn't need to take away from the, because it's so easy to go into the negative, like, I can't believe that, like, how picky do you get? You're a homeless person, you don't want to see this food. But maybe some homeless people just get a lot, and they get even a lot of money. Some of them have bank accounts. And yeah, so it's just important, I think, to remember that feeling of wanting to give. And then just as we're practicing with our meditation or anything else, we're inclining towards that wholesome element, like that sanya, that perception, the mindfulness of that feeling, and preserving that feeling in our mind, because it's easy, it just can get crashed, and as was described in the talk by Ajahn Jayasaro, that it can just kind of like wash away if then that's completely forgotten, and it's just this focus on like, oh, I didn't eat it, and what's wrong with this guy, and on and on the mind goes. So it's too bad. It's like really throwing away merit because we chose to focus on the unwholesome element rather than the wholesome element. And there really was a wholesome element there that could have it doesn't really matter the outcome. And it's interesting, I think, just as a sense of karma, because often there's this anicca element we want to control, as you're talking about. We want to control the outcome, like I want it to be used as I intended it to be used. And we just can't know. We can only honor our own generosity. So that kind of sense of like, well, I have my karma and the other person has their karma, and I wish for their karma to be uplifted and for them to be brightened by my act of giving, but you just don't know, what that's going to be, and so it could be any outcome. So in certain ways, I think we have to prepare for it, like prepare for okay, like I'm going to do this, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the result's going to be.
Yeah, and I think to not have that negative interaction like taint or prevent you from continuing to cultivate that is sometimes can be pretty hard if it's a really negative interaction, and then it's like, okay, maybe I never want to do that again. But yeah, it's good to remind.
Expressions, kind of quotes around like, don't let them take you down, or don't, like that kind of sense of like, don't allow the negativity of the world to there's so many expressions, I can't think of them right now, but just to kind of take away your goodness. And it's easy, especially these days. I think it's easy to have happen. So we have to kind of almost like build ourselves up, remind ourselves of our own goodness, and actually like preserve it, like foster it and protect it. It's like protecting our own goodness, I think.
I remember, just along those lines, it was similar related, but it was a comment from Ajahn Suchito, along the lines more of metta rather than dana, but similar kind of a thing, is that, like if somebody's that you've been really trying to help or trying to offer, some sort of support or kindness, comes back and, attacks you or accuses you or wrongly, justifies whatever, his phrase was just like, whatever you do, don't let them hijack your metta. Yeah, you could say the same thing, don't let them hijack your dana, if it's not the response that you're hoping for.
So I just had a question related to merit. I can't remember exactly what was said in that, I think it said something about that's the uplift of the mind. And I was just wondering if I heard correctly and how one would characterize it, because even though I've heard many skillful definitions, I have to admit, sometimes when I hear somebody say something, like I've done something or whatever, and they say something about merit, not my mental reaction, but my emotional reaction is to cringe, because I feel like what the response it creates in me is like, feels like I'm doing it to get something, which takes something away from me, but I know that's not right or true. And so any expounding you can do on what it said, the actual, when it spoke about that, and I'm always hoping to hear something that doesn't just change my mind, but changes my emotional response to my reaction to that word, because I know it's not right. Thank you.
I mean, the way I see it is that, like, merit it's a bad word for punya. You know, there aren't really very good translations for the word punya in Thai boon. But it's the result of chaga, dana. You know, it's the result of generosity, of giving. It's not a transactional thing. So, yeah, it's unless you're doing it as a transactional thing, you know, which is one of the motivations for giving. But if you look at merit as the result, you know, maybe I think another maybe more better, you know, translation would be something like goodness. Is that the word that's often used as a substitute for merit, for punya? You know, sort of like rejoicing in the goodness that arises. You know, whether it's the goodness that then comes to you, or the goodness that is just made in general to the world. You know, it's a little bit broader and not quite so transactional. But I think the word itself it's kind of a weak translation of that word punya, which is just that uplifting sense of, you know, gladness, goodness that is a result of dana, chaga.
Thank you. Yeah, because the feeling is so beautiful, and then I just have a different response to that word. And,
yeah. Well, if you maybe think of it as, instead of when somebody says the word, "Oh, I'm making merit," you know, you can retranslate it in your head to, "Oh, I'm making goodness."
And I'm speaking more for myself, not for
Yeah.
you know, anyone else. I just thank you. That's helpful.
The idea of somebody stealing your merit, right? So you're going to do something wholesome, and then somebody does it, the same thing you wanted to do before you. And you're like, ah. But it's silly, because the goodness already occurred as soon as the thought occurred to do that thing. And so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be like that one actually, you know, just the thought actually is like most of the goodness, so that arising, that wholesomeness. The fact that somebody else does it, then the goodness on top of that is the mudita, that then it's like, oh, okay, I'm so happy that they thought of the same thing. So then we actually like double our own goodness in a way. We kind of, instead of take it away by thinking, that was supposed to be mine. So that's another thing, is like the word merit seems like it comes from accumulation of something, and one only gets it when one fulfills the actual the action towards the other person. But it's just the thought of doing something good that is like, to me, it's like most of it. Of course, if it's then like, no, I'm not going to do that for them, I don't like them, then that, again, takes it away. But if just somebody else does the same thing, it's interesting, because even that expression of like not stealing merit or something, it's sort of, it doesn't see the point of it. It's just that thought of wholesomeness and goodness that's arising, and then we can kind of also just turn it around and just say like, oh, wonderful for them, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful, because based on the way you characterize it, it's not even logical to say steal one's merit, because it just already happened.